We all need help. I said I am someone who was in that place, and I think if I did not accept the help and put my pride aside, that I probably would not be here right now talking to you.
Welcome to a special episode of the Mid-America PTTC podcast. I'm your host, Dave Clausen, and I'm the director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center. Now, many of you know that September is Recovery Month, and in honor of that, we have teamed up with the Mid-America ATTC to share some recovery stories from right here in our region. Now, each episode is a unique and very personal story. We are honored to have such amazing people offer their time and share their stories with us. Now, it's our hope that these stories will be a message that recovery is possible, and together we are stronger. Now, before we get into the content, we would also like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. All right, and I would like to welcome Mirna to the podcast. Mirna, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We greatly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the podcast and share a little bit about your story. But for those listening, would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Mirna Herrera, and I work at Truman Medical Center. Actually, I've been here for 8 years, and do I go into the next part right now? I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, yep. You can just go right through all those questions. Talk about your name, work, where you live, and personal fact.
Awesome. Well, I'll do it again.
Okay.
All right. So my name is Mirna Herrera, and I am at Truman Medical Center in Kansas City, and I have been here for almost 8 years. I actually started back in 2011 as a music therapy intern, and from there I moved into a music therapy role, and surprisingly not too long after that, I was introduced to the peer support world, which was a life-changing job and work for me. So I moved into that position, and I started being able to supervise peer support workers, and that kind of introduced me to more of people with lived experience and talking about their lived experience, which that was not something I was used to or had ever done before. I just had kind of a mental illness, which initially just qualified me. So I went from there because I qualified for it. So since then, I led the consumer operated drop-in center, which is all mental health consumer operated, which means everyone that worked for that department had a mental illness, and that's what qualified everyone else. And from there, recently, back in December, I moved up to a management position to manage a group home at Truman Medical Center too. And with that position, I actually took some of the peer supporters that worked for me that wanted to also focus on their strengths and do more than what they were doing right now. And they also came with me to help that transition and to help the residents that live at this group home. Actually, this group home just opened up. I helped start this group home open up in January. So we've been only operating for like 9 months right now. And then the exciting news are because ever since I left the peer support role and took this position, while I still was very immersed in the peer support world, I always knew that that was my passion. and that my passion was to go back to that peer support world on a bigger scale. So I'm hoping that soon, I'm assuming it's going to happen, that we're hoping to open a peer support department for Children's Medical Center, where it will house all peer supporters, and they will be able to have support each other and be able to work on the teams. And we go beyond this to go more into the community and more into reaching out people who are hard to reach when it comes to peer support. So what brought me to here in the first place is I said I live in Kansas City right now, and I haven't always lived in Kansas City. I don't know if you noticed the accent, but that's where I'm from. I'm not from here. I am from Nazareth, actually from Nazareth, Israel. I joke around and say a lot of people ask me if I knew Jesus, and I say yes, he was my grandma's neighbor. But I get asked that all the time, and it's okay if you ask me questions. I know a lot of people hesitate to ask me questions and they just assume, but I would rather you ask me than assume. But growing up in Israel, it's always been kind of a struggle initially for an identity, because I am a Christian, I'm an Arab, and I'm from Israel, so people didn't really know who I am. So when people ask me where are you from, it's never just a simple answer. Usually people ask me, hey, where are you from? I'm from Israel. Oh, are you Jewish? No, I am Christian. Oh, I'm Arab? I tell them. Oh, are you Muslim? I'm like, no, I'm Christian. And not a lot of people know that we do exist. It is a holy man after all. But as I said, it's always going to be a long answer, and people are free to ask me anything about that too. So that's kind of like a fact that also makes me a trilingual. That's even a word. Yes, I think I speak Arabic, Hebrew, and English. So that's kind of an exciting fact. I speak 3 languages, a little bit of French, and I'm hoping to learn some more languages here.
Wow.
Yes, my mother tongue is Arabic. Had to know Hebrew to survive in Israel, and English we learned from first grade. So it is my 3rd language, but it was always easier for me to express myself in English. I don't know why, but I still think in Arabic in my head, but I speak in English. I don't know how that works, but it works in my head.
Hey, as long as it works.
Yes, somehow it always works. But growing up in Israel, and it's, I mean, the world knows it's been a war, basically a war zone. One of my first memories actually in Israel is when I was in first grade and we were going through war with Lebanon, and then we had to carry our gas mask in a box to school. Which, that's not something, instead of your lunchbox, you're kind of carrying a gas mask and you decorate it. I still remember decorating it with Hello Kitty stickers on the box to make it look more inviting. But that's one of my first memories as, when I get into my PTSD, which is kind of my primary diagnosis, those are kind of the first memories that come up. Is I remember those gas masks. I remember walking to school. I remember seeing rocket ships. But, that's kind of like all the things that we've seen, and there's been internal wars, a lot of things happening in Israel that kind of got me to a point when I was in high school that I said, I don't think I'll ever be able to grow a family in here, because I don't ever want my children to go through the things I've seen. So and I remember that moment. I was in high school and I was leaving school, and I see there was a big group of people. I mean, big, like, probably a few hundreds of people walking around. And apparently when we were in school, there was some fightings and shootings happening outside. So I remember people walking around, and I remember seeing one of the people that were carried. And when I've seen that, I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I have kids and my kids are going to see this and they're going to be traumatized? And I didn't realize I was traumatized back then, because, when you're living in your trauma, when you're living into that world, you are living in like a survival mode. Your body is like, and your mind is in that survival mode, like this is normal living. So this is what it was for me back then. I believe that this is normal living and this is what we can see. This is what the world sees. But at that moment, I'm like, no, there has to be something better. But I also knew that if I came to the United States without having at least proper education and a base to be able to come here and survive in this big world by myself, that I needed to get education. So I made sure that I follow whatever I needed to follow. I did my bachelor's in musicology and bachelor's in psychology in Jerusalem. Out of all the places, that was a great place to have. And then in Jerusalem, that when I was done, I'm like, finally, I saved enough money. I was working. I'm going to come to the United States because this is the place where people live peacefully. And this is a place for opportunities. So I decided to do my master's in music therapy, and that's what got me to come to the United States. And, I do believe, God put people in your life for a reason. You may not understand it initially, but that's, I questioned a lot. But then when I came here, I said that when I came here, I never was diagnosed. Back in Israel, when I came here, I actually was at a music therapy conference, and they decided to do some guided imagery in music, and they had a big drum circle. Well, I did not know that big drum circle is going to be the beginning of my recovery. I really had no clue that a drum circle can do this for me. So they started playing the drums. And if you can't imagine it, imagine just a bunch of drums playing around, not in synchrony, but just going basically just playing drums out of rhythm because that's what we were asked to do. And that just reminded me of a war zone. And that was the last thing I remember because I went into a very strong flashback. And the next thing I remember is somehow I was out of that room with people around me, kind of trying to help me kind of come back to reality. And that was kind of the first place of where my flashbacks began. And that kind of went along with having more nightmares and a lot of stuff happening that affected my studies and at UMKC is where I went to do my master's. And that was kind of my thing about the beginning of the recovery that led me to where I am today. Because a Christian Arab from Israel coming to the United States to be a music therapist and end up being in a peer support world and not doing music therapy is not what I ever imagined myself to do. But that's where I am right now. Is there anything else you need to know about my recovery story?
So you shared a little bit about how it impacted you and just a little hint of how you found recovery. But before we get back to, your recovery story, helping you along the way, I'm curious, how did your family and friends talk about mental illness or recovery?
Yeah, so in the Arab society, the Arabic world, that was definitely not something that anyone talks about. It is a lot better now than what it used to be over like 10 years ago, over 13 years ago is when I was in school. And I was just to give an example on how much the Arab society does not talk about mental illness. I was in a psychology major in college, and out of the 300 students that were in my class, only me and another person were actually Arabs, because that was not something anyone talked about. So when I came to the United States, that was like my first flashbacks were just the beginning of it. I still didn't have friends here, didn't have family. So I did feel very alone. And I had not told my family about my PTSD up until last year. They didn't know anything about that was happening with me because they were still living there. They were still living in that society. So I did not want them to feel ashamed of me having this because it wasn't something that is talked about back then. And they were just so proud of me, everything I'm doing, that I didn't want to ruin that image because I was away from them. I didn't want my family to worry about me either, because that's something that, people worry about, parents worry about. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's over there by herself, no family, no friends. Because I literally came to the United States with one suitcase and a pillow. That's what I came with here 11 years ago. That's all I brought with me. And I started kind of a new life here. So with my friends here, I had some friends. I didn't really talk about it much with my friends. And just when I started my peer support role, and here is when I kind of surrounded myself with the people who understood it more than people who would judge me for it, which kind of made me stronger in that way too. So it was very lonely first few years after that first flashback. It was very hard, but I made it through it eventually because I had to.
Because you had to, and you said you surrounded yourself with friends that supported you, because when it comes down to it, together we are stronger.
Absolutely.
Yes, and so you shared that drum circle was sort of how you started to find recovery. I'm interested to know, did anybody help you along the way, and if so, what made them stand out?
So honestly, what really helped me along the way, I remember when I was doing my sorry. So what really helped me along the way was my professor. So one of my professors noticed that I was having a hard time, especially when I was doing hospice care. We had to do rotations to work at different fields, and one of my fields was hospice care. And she noticed how hard it was for me to work in that and being around people at the end of their lives, because I've seen so much death in my past that was kind of a big trigger for me. And I really think if it wasn't for that professor that saw that and kind of um, kind of made me, in a way, go to see a therapist. It was basically at that moment where I have to stop my recovery process, or I'm gonna seriously they're gonna kick me out of the program, and I'm gonna have to go back to Israel. All my dreams are gonna be shattered of starting a new life here. So I kind of didn't have a choice, but I know she pushed me because she knew how passionate I was about my work and my school, that she pushed me to see a therapist. And she really just she supported me. She's like, you have to do it. And she supported me, and like she took me out of that rotation at the hospice, and she put me to work with kids. So that was kind of a big help for me. But that was my initial the initial support that I got with that. She was actually one of the only people when initially that kind of knew about this and what was I going through. And if I hadn't had anyone to really talk to about this, because I'm not someone who goes and asks for help. Kind of help is forced on me, which is good for me. It works for me, and it doesn't work for everyone. But it's because I was afraid to ask for help. So, but she knew I needed help, and she kind of forced me to get the help, which is great because, as I said, that was very hard for me back then because I always believe that I'm strong and I don't need someone to help me because I've gone through all this stuff in my life and I still made it through alive. So I'm strong. I don't need anyone else to help me. Gosh, boy, was I wrong. Uh, so, and after that, I actually started dating who is now my husband. That was my second semester here. And um, he was basically almost kind of the second person too that I have shared with him, kind of like the stuff that I've gone through. And I really immediately thought that, oh my gosh, he's gonna think that like I'm some sort of I'm not worthy of being with him, and he's gonna run away and he's gonna be scared. And again, that was one of the things where I was so wrong. And when I started talking about this with him, he really helped me through this. I mean, I remember even one time I was having such a hard time. I had a really bad nightmare, and I woke up and I was very much. It was pretty bad for me, and he knew about it, and they came the next day with some brownies that his mom has made for me. And I know I remember that because that was like 10 years ago, but that was kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to marry this guy and his family. Because, like even his mom, I didn't even know that I didn't think he shared anything with his mom. I think he just told his mom, hey, she's had a really rough time over here and she made me brownies and she brought them over. I'm like, that's what I need. And since then, he has been my rock. And he's been my rock in a way that I don't have to go and tell him what I'm going through. That because I don't talk about it with him much, because I do talk about my recovery a lot at work. So when I go home, he knows that I do not need to talk about anything going on with me personally, but he knows if I need it. He knows if I need help. He knows how to support me without saying anything. And that's kind of like, that's the strength that I've received from him, because he just knows when I need him to be strong for me or when he needs to make me brownies. So
Oh, that is beautiful. I'm just smiling at that true love there.
yes, absolutely.
Yes, and I did want to kind of highlight too. You mentioned that your professor, took an interest and just reached a hand out, a helping hand.
Yes.
To be there to support you, and how impactful that was. And I think that's an important point for those listening. Something as little as just reaching out and taking an interest in somebody, whether you're in a peer support role directly or not.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to now, what would you want to say to someone currently struggling with mental illness?
Don't be stubborn and in denial that you need help, because we all need help, no matter how strong you are. I did not accept the help and put my pride aside, that I probably would not be here right now talking to you. I think when that professor basically told me what she sees and she was worried about me, the things that I didn't see myself. A lot of the times, it's hard for us to really acknowledge and to really say that I need help. And other people can see that we need help, even when we don't see it. And the people that are close to you will know a lot. They have the experience a lot of the time to help you. Even if they don't have it, they will guide you in the right way to help you. And that was a big thing for me, is accepting that. And even though initially I was kind of ashamed, like, oh my gosh, now I have a mental illness. Oh my gosh, now I have this diagnosis that I have to live with the rest of my life, and I didn't want to talk about it with anyone. That has changed in such a big way. That has become more of my strength in everything that I do than something that comes up accidentally. That's the first thing I say when I work with people here. And there's not one person that I work with, whether it's a client or a staff or a manager, that does not know that I have a mental illness and I have PTSD. And because that's who I am. I mean, my PTSD doesn't define who I am, but the experiences and everything that I've gone through is because those experiences that's why I'm here, and that's the person that I am. So when someone is in the beginning stages of that, the hardest thing, but the most important thing, is to acknowledge that you can't do it by yourself. You need to go and get some help, and believe the people that when they tell you you need some help, and let them help you if they want to. Because if you think about it, when you're helping someone else, how good does it feel for you too? Because you help someone else, let someone else be able to help you too. So.
Yeah. So like you started out with, don't be stubborn.
Yes.
People are here to help. They want to help because they care about you. So let them help.
Oh, and I'm the most stubborn person you meet. I am so stubborn. My husband say that all the time. But you know what? It was that moment when I just let go of my stubbornness.
Mm-hmm.
when the magic started.
Comes right back to you. Together, we are stronger.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to kind of wrap things up with one real final question. What would you like to say to those working in the prevention, treatment, and recovery fields, the workforce, somebody that might not have lived experience?
Someone who might not have lived experience, I would say I think maybe you do not realize how common it is to have some sort of lived experience, and I think sometimes we do not understand, we do not know what someone has gone through, and instead of being I would ask for people to seriously just be compassionate and to not judge. It is so hard for people. It's easier for people to be clinical and not to put emotional aside when you're working in a treatment facility or with patients, and being able to put on that clinical hat and put on that role of like, oh, I'm here to help you. But a lot of people forget the compassion part of it, and they forget that everyone has gone through a story. And I'm not only talking about the clients that you're working with, I am talking about your coworkers, even your managers. You do not know what they have gone through. And instead of judging someone, a simple example of instead of judging someone that they're late for work, just wonder like what happened to them before they came to work that made them late. And sometimes just asking that question like, hey, is everything okay, makes a huge difference in someone's life, because some people are just not that open to talk about them and their experiences. And I have found that out a lot in the work that I do. As I said, I'm not in a peer recovery, in the peer support role right now, but in everything that I've done in the recovery process, in the interview process, even when I interview people here, I share that I have mental illness, and I share that I'm in this role because I know how hard it is to be going through it by yourself. And I would want someone who has an experience to help you through it too. And just, and it's amazing to me of how many people I have interviewed that after I shared my story, they have shared that they have their own story. And it's just amazing to me. It was a big aha moment for me to see that, oh my gosh, doesn't have to be in a peer support world to know that you have mental illness. It can be as simple as you share your story. And a lot of the people that survive in the field of treatment and they survive the field of behavioral health are those people who have their own experiences, because those are the people who have gone through it and they really want to help. And even if they didn't go through it personally, if they have a family member who have gone through something that they have witnessed firsthand, just knowing that the things that they go through beyond the treatment is makes the compassion look more easier to give.
Mhm.
So that's what I kind of learned in my non-peer support world. But I think I was put in that position for that specific reason. I think that God has led me to take this position and briefly for like 9 months, and then go back to the peer support world. It's just so that I can see that it is very common, and it is so common, and to give me more strength to talk about me and my recovery story to help that break that silence from their side too.
Oh, yes, indeed. And you're doing wonderful things. So
Uh,
thank you for all the work that you're doing. Um, it, I, if I were to summarize our chat today, it feels like, that same theme, together we are stronger.
yes.
Don't try to do it on your own.
Mhm.
To also, for those in the workforce, reach your hand out, ask, help, don't make assumptions or judgments, and remember that we are all in a position to be able to support somebody seeking, struggling with, or living in recovery.
Yes, absolutely. Together we are stronger for sure.
Uh, Absolutely. All right. Well, Mirna, thank you very, very much for coming on the show to share your story and be vulnerable, and act as a beacon of hope and encouragement for those listening. So thank you very much. You're an amazing person, and we greatly appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be able to even talk about myself more, which is not easy for me to do. So thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you very much.